There comes a moment when silence stops feeling peaceful and starts feeling like abandonment. When the prayers you've whispered for years begin to echo back hollow, as if the universe itself has turned its face away. You sit in meditation, seeking that familiar warmth of connection, only to find yourself staring into an abyss that stares back with infinite patience. This is not depression. This is not spiritual bypassing. This is the moment when your soul realizes that all the healing you've been seeking, all the techniques you've mastered, all the wounds you've tended to with such careful devotion, they were never meant to restore you to who you were. They were meant to prepare you for who you are becoming. You see, there's a profound difference between healing and rebirth. Healing suggests something was broken and needs to be fixed, returned to its original state. But what if nothing was ever broken? What if the very idea of being broken was itself the illusion that kept you small, kept you searching outside yourself for wholeness that was never lost? Carl Jung understood this distinction intimately. He spoke of individuation not as a process of recovery, but as a process of becoming. The Latin word individuum means indivisible, not pieced back together, but recognized as already whole, already complete, already containing within its depths everything it needs to transform. The mystics knew this too. They spoke of the dark night of the soul not as a problem to be solved, but as a chrysalis to be entered. The caterpillar doesn't heal into a butterfly. It dissolves completely, surrendering every familiar structure, every known identity, trusting in a process so radical that it can only be called death and rebirth. And here you are, feeling that dissolution beginning. The old stories about yourself no longer fit. The roles you've played with such dedication feel like costumes that have grown too small. The very foundations of your reality are shifting, and no amount of healing can restore the ground that is meant to fall away. This is the irreversible spiritual moment. Not the moment you choose to grow, but the moment growth chooses you. Not the moment you decide to transform, but the moment transformation decides you are ready, whether you feel ready or not. It arrives like a thief in the night, stealing away your old certainties, your familiar complaints, your comfortable suffering. You may have felt it as a sudden emptiness where your old desires used to live. Perhaps you noticed that the things that once brought you joy now feel distant, as if you're watching someone else's life through glass. Maybe you've begun to question not just what you want, but who is doing the wanting. The very you that has been seeking healing is starting to feel like a stranger. This is not spiritual crisis. This is spiritual emergence. The emergence of something that was always there, waiting beneath the layers of conditioning, beneath the stories of lack and limitation, beneath the very need to be healed. Something that doesn't need to be fixed because it was never broken. Something that doesn't need to be found because it was never lost. Jung called this the self, not the ego self that carries your name and social security number, but the deeper self that dreams your dreams and knows your destiny before your mind can comprehend it. This self has been orchestrating your entire journey, including every wound, every healing, every moment of confusion and clarity, all in service of this moment of recognition. The recognition that you are not a broken thing seeking repair. You are a divine being in the process of remembering your divinity. And divinity doesn't heal. It reveals. It doesn't recover. It discovers. It doesn't fix. It transforms. So as you sit in the strange new silence, as you feel the familiar moorings of your identity loosening, as you sense something vast and unknown stirring in the depths of your being, know that you are not losing yourself. You are losing your limitations. You are not falling apart. You are falling awake. The masks you've worn with such careful attention are beginning to slip, not because they're damaged, but because the face beneath them is ready to be seen. The roles you've played with such dedication are losing their appeal, not because you've failed at them, but because you've outgrown them. The very self you've been trying to heal is revealing itself to be nothing more than a costume worn by something infinitely more magnificent. This is the beginning of your rebirth. Not the gentle, gradual healing you may have expected, but the radical, revolutionary emergence of who you've always been beneath the stories of who you thought you were. The caterpillar doesn't gradually become a butterfly. It surrenders to complete metamorphosis, trusting in the intelligence of transformation itself. And so must you. The healing journey has brought you to this threshold. Now the real work begins. Not the work of fixing what's broken, but the work of allowing what's whole to emerge. Not the work of becoming worthy of love, but the work of recognizing that you are love itself, temporarily forgetting its own nature. The old you is dying. The new you is not yet born. And here, in this space between worlds, in this sacred pause between endings and beginnings, you are being invited to trust in the intelligence of your own transformation. To stop trying to heal your way back to who you were, and instead allow yourself to be reborn into who you are becoming. This is where the real journey begins. Not in the comfortable territory of healing, but in the unknown landscape of rebirth. Not in the familiar work of fixing, but in the mysterious work of allowing. Not in the safe space of recovery, but in the sacred space of revelation. Your ego mind will resist this transition. It will try to convince you that you're losing your way, that you need to get back to the work of healing, that something is terribly wrong. But your soul knows better. Your soul has been preparing for this moment your entire life. This moment when you stop trying to heal into wholeness and start allowing wholeness to emerge through you. The question is not whether you're ready. The question is whether you're willing. Willing to let go of the familiar story of yourself as someone who needs healing. Willing to embrace the radical possibility that you are already whole, already complete, already everything you've been seeking to become. The chrysalis is forming around you. The old world is dissolving. The new world is about to be born. And you are both the dying and the being born. You are both the question and the answer. You are both the seeker and the sought. Welcome to your rebirth. The mirror you've been looking into your entire life is starting to crack. Not because it's broken, but because the face looking back is no longer the same face that first learned to recognize itself there. The reflection that once felt so familiar, so certain, so undeniably you, it's becoming a stranger. This is the beginning of what Jung called the confrontation with the shadow, but it's not what most people think. The shadow isn't just the parts of yourself you've rejected or denied. It's the revelation that the very self you've been so carefully constructing, protecting, and healing is itself a construction. A mask worn so long you forgot there was a face beneath it. You built this identity carefully, brick by brick, wound by wound, healing by healing. Each experience added another layer to the story of who you are. The shy child who learned to be funny to avoid rejection. The sensitive soul who learned to be strong to avoid being hurt. The generous heart who learned to be needed to avoid being abandoned. Each adaptation, each survival strategy, each coping mechanism became part of the elaborate persona you presented to the world. And it worked. For a while. This carefully constructed self carried you through the challenges of life, helped you navigate relationships, build careers, create meaning. You even learned to heal parts of it, to nurture its wounds, to celebrate its growth. You became very good at being this version of yourself. But now something is shifting. The mask is growing heavy. The role is feeling forced. The very characteristics you've identified with most strongly are beginning to feel like costumes that no longer fit. You look in the mirror and think, who is this person? And why do I feel like I'm pretending to be them? This is not a breakdown. This is a breakthrough. The false self is beginning to crumble, not because you're doing anything wrong, but because you're finally ready to do something right. You're finally ready to meet the authentic self that has been waiting patiently beneath all the layers of conditioning, all the stories of who you thought you had to be. Jung understood that individuation requires this confrontation with the persona, the mask we wear in social situations, the face we present to the world. But he also understood that this confrontation is terrifying because it means acknowledging that so much of what we've called self is actually performance. So much of what we've called personality is actually adaptation. So much of what we've called identity is actually strategy. The shy person realizes that shyness was a way of avoiding the risk of being truly seen. The people pleaser discovers that niceness was a way of controlling how others perceive them. The helper understands that giving was a way of ensuring they would be needed. The achiever recognizes that success was a way of proving worthiness. The spiritual seeker admits that even their spirituality has been a sophisticated form of spiritual materialism. This recognition can feel devastating at first. If so much of what you've called self is actually persona, then who are you really? If your personality is largely adaptation, then what is your authentic nature? If your identity is mostly strategy, then what is your true essence? The ego mind panics at these questions. It tries to defend the false self, to justify the persona, to prove that the mask is real. It creates elaborate arguments for why you really are shy, why you really are a people pleaser, why you really are a helper or an achiever or a seeker. It points to evidence, to patterns, to consistent behavior across years or decades. But something deeper in you is no longer convinced. Something deeper in you is beginning to suspect that you are far more vast, far more mysterious, far more unknowable than any of these limited identities could contain. Something deeper in you is beginning to hunger for the authentic self that lives beneath all the roles, all the strategies, all the carefully constructed ways of being. This is when the real shadow work begins. Not the work of integrating the parts of yourself you've rejected, but the work of recognizing that the very self you've been trying to heal and integrate is itself a shadow of something far greater. Not the work of making the false self better, but the work of allowing the false self to die so that the true self can be born. The process is not comfortable. It feels like losing yourself because in many ways you are. You're losing the familiar landmarks of your identity, the comfortable patterns of your personality, the predictable responses of your persona. You're losing the story you've been telling yourself about who you are, why you're here, what you're meant to do. But what you're really losing is limitation. What you're really losing is the prison of a fixed identity. What you're really losing is the exhaustion of maintaining a false self that was never meant to be permanent. In the ancient mysteries, they spoke of the initiate who must die before they can be reborn. This wasn't metaphorical. This was the literal experience of watching everything you thought you knew about yourself dissolve, leaving you naked and new in the presence of your own essential nature. The caterpillar doesn't partially dissolve. It doesn't keep its favorite parts while transforming others. It surrenders completely to the process, trusting that whatever emerges will be exactly what it's meant to become. The butterfly doesn't remember being a caterpillar. It doesn't pine for its old form or try to heal its way back to what it was. And neither must you. The false self that is crumbling was never meant to be permanent. It was meant to be a cocoon, a protective shell that would house you while you grew strong enough to emerge as who you really are. It was meant to be a temporary identity that would serve you until you were ready to discover your eternal essence. The work now is not to heal the false self back to wholeness. The work now is to allow the false self to dissolve with grace, with gratitude, with the recognition that it has served its purpose perfectly. The work now is to trust the process of death and rebirth that is happening within you, even when you can't see where it's leading. This is the spiritual courage that Jung spoke of, the courage to face the void that appears when all your familiar structures fall away. The courage to sit in the unknowing, in the uncertainty, in the space between who you were and who you are becoming. The courage to trust that what is dying in you was never truly alive, and what is being born in you was never truly dead. The mirror is cracking. The mask is slipping. The false self is crumbling. And beneath it all, something magnificent is stirring. Something that doesn't need to be healed because it was never wounded. Something that doesn't need to be found because it was never lost. Something that doesn't need to be born because it has always been. The question is not whether you're ready to let go of the false self. The question is whether you're willing to trust what's waiting to emerge when you do. There comes a moment in every genuine spiritual journey when you realize you cannot go back. Not to the life you lived before, not to the person you were before, not to the innocence you had before you glimpsed the vastness of your own nature. It's like standing at the edge of a cliff in the dark, knowing that the only way forward is to jump, but unable to see where you'll land. This is the threshold Jung wrote about, the point in individuation where the old self must die completely for the new self to be born. It's not a gradual transition, not a gentle evolution, but a radical discontinuity. A death and resurrection that happens in the secret chambers of the soul, invisible to the outside world but earth-shattering to the one experiencing it. You feel it first as a growing sense of unreality about your previous life. The goals that once motivated you seem hollow. The relationships that once defined you feel distant. The activities that once brought you joy feel mechanical. It's as if you're watching your own life through glass, present but not participating, observing but not engaged. Your friends and family may notice nothing. You still show up, still perform your roles, still speak the familiar words. But inside, you know that something fundamental has shifted. The person they're talking to is not the same person who lived in this body last month, last year, last decade. That person is dissolving cell by cell, memory by memory, identity by identity. This is what the mystics called the dark night of the soul, but it's not darkness in the sense of suffering. It's darkness in the sense of unknowing. It's the darkness of the womb, the darkness of the cocoon, the darkness of the cave where transformation happens. It's the darkness that precedes every birth, every emergence, every revelation. Jung understood that this threshold cannot be crossed through effort or intention, cannot be scheduled or planned. It happens when the soul is ready, when the false self has finally exhausted its ability to contain the vastness of what you truly are. It happens when the chrysalis has served its purpose and the butterfly is ready to emerge. But here's what makes this threshold so challenging. It requires complete surrender. Not the partial surrender of giving up certain habits or behaviors, but the total surrender of giving up the very sense of being someone who can surrender. It requires the dissolution of the you who has been trying to control your spiritual journey, trying to manage your growth, trying to direct your transformation. The ego mind cannot comprehend this level of surrender, can understand sacrifice, compromise, even significant change. But it cannot understand its own complete dissolution. It cannot understand that the very seeking, the very effort to become enlightened, the very desire to be transformed, is what must be surrendered. This is why Jung spoke of individuation as a process that happens to us, not something we do. We don't individuate. We are individuated. We don't transform. We are transformed. We don't cross the threshold. We are carried across it by forces far greater than our personal will. The threshold appears differently for each person. For some, it's a sudden recognition that everything they've believed about themselves is a story. For others, it's a gradual realization that they are not the thinker of their thoughts, not the feeler of their feelings, not the experiencer of their experiences. For still others, it's a profound moment of seeing through the illusion of separation, recognizing that the boundaries between self and other, between inner and outer, between human and divine, are nothing more than conceptual constructs. But however it appears, the threshold has certain unmistakable characteristics. There is a sense of point of no return. There is a recognition that the old ways of being are no longer available. There is a feeling of free fall, of being carried by currents you cannot control or direct. There is a simultaneous terror and exhilaration, like being swept away by a river whose destination you cannot see. The ancient initiates prepared for this moment their entire lives. They knew that crossing the threshold required a kind of spiritual death that would leave them unrecognizable to themselves. They knew that whatever emerged on the other side would be so fundamentally different from what entered that it could only be called rebirth. But you may not have had the luxury of preparation. You may have arrived at this threshold through crisis, through loss, through the simple accumulation of experiences that finally broke open the shell of your old identity. You may have been thrust into this transformation without warning, without guides, without roadmaps. This is the nature of awakening in our time. It doesn't happen in monasteries or ashrams, but in the middle of ordinary life. It doesn't happen after years of practice, but in the midst of whatever practices you've been given. It doesn't happen when you're ready, but when reality is ready for you to see through the illusion of your separateness. The threshold is not a place you can visit and then return from. It's not an experience you can have and then integrate. It's a point of no return, a fundamental shift in the nature of consciousness itself. Once you've seen through the illusion of the separate self, you cannot unsee it. Once you've recognized the dreamlike nature of your personal identity, you cannot unknow it. This is why the threshold feels so terrifying. It's not just change. It's irreversible change. It's not just transformation. It's metamorphosis. It's not just growth. It's death and rebirth. The caterpillar that enters the cocoon does not emerge as an improved caterpillar. It emerges as something entirely different, something that cannot return to its previous form. And yet, there is something in you that recognizes this threshold as homecoming. Something in you that has been waiting your entire life for this moment of complete surrender. Something in you that knows that what you're losing was never real, and what you're gaining was never absent. This is the paradox of the threshold. Feels like losing everything, but it's actually finding everything. Feels like dying, but it's actually being born. Feels like falling, but it's actually learning to fly. It feels like disappearance, but it's actually the first moment of true appearance. The threshold cannot be crossed through courage alone, though courage is required. Cannot be crossed through faith alone, though faith is necessary. Cannot be crossed through understanding alone, though understanding helps. It can only be crossed through complete surrender to the process of transformation itself. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of the transcendent function, the mysterious process by which the conscious and unconscious minds unite to create something entirely new. It's not something you do. It's something that happens through you when you stop trying to control the process and allow yourself to be transformed by it. The threshold is calling. You can feel it in the restlessness that won't be soothed by your old comforts. You can feel it in the questions that won't be answered by your old certainties. You can feel it in the longing that won't be satisfied by your old pursuits. You can feel it in the growing sense that you are not who you thought you were, and you are not here for what you thought you were here for. The only question is whether you're ready to let go of the familiar shore and trust the current that wants to carry you to the other side. Whether you're ready to stop trying to heal your way back to who you were and start allowing yourself to be reborn as who you are becoming. The threshold is not a destination. It's a passageway. It's not a place to arrive at. It's a process to surrender to. It's not something to achieve. It's something to allow. It's not something to understand. It's something to experience. And once you cross it, you will understand why it had to happen exactly as it did. You will understand why all the healing, all the seeking, all the effort to become better was necessary preparation for this moment of complete letting go. You will understand why you had to build a self so carefully before you could surrender it so completely. The threshold is here. The moment is now. The only question is whether you're ready to step through. On the other side of the threshold, everything changes. Not gradually, not subtly, but completely. It's like waking up from a dream that was so vivid, so convincing, that you never questioned whether it was real. Suddenly, you're operating from an entirely different frequency of consciousness, and the world that seems so solid, so urgent, so problematic, reveals itself to be far more fluid, far more mysterious, far more responsive to the quality of your inner state than you ever imagined. The first thing you notice is the quality of silence. It's not the absence of sound, but the presence of something vast and spacious that was always there, waiting beneath the constant chatter of your thoughts. This silence doesn't feel empty, feels full, feels alive. It feels like the source from which all sound, all thought, all experience arises and to which it returns. Jung called this the transcendent function, the mysterious process by which the conscious and unconscious minds unite to create a new level of awareness. But living from this new frequency, you understand that it's not really a function at all. It's a recognition that the separation between conscious and unconscious, between self and other, between inner and outer, was always conceptual, never actual. The voice that emerges from this recognition is not the voice of your personality, not the voice of your ego, not even the voice of your soul as you previously understood it. It's the voice of what Jung called the self, the deeper intelligence that has been orchestrating your journey all along, the wisdom that knows your destiny before your mind can comprehend it, the love that has been guiding you through every apparent mistake, every seeming detour, every moment of confusion and clarity. This voice doesn't speak in words, though it can translate itself into words when necessary. It speaks in knowing. It speaks in recognition. It speaks in the sudden understanding that arises when you stop trying to figure out your life and start allowing your life to reveal itself to you. It speaks in the deep certainty that emerges when you stop asking, "What should I do?" and start asking, "What wants to emerge through me?" Living from this frequency, you discover that time itself operates differently. The linear progression of past, present, and future gives way to a kind of eternal now that somehow contains all possibilities, all potentials, all timelines. You begin to understand that your life is not a story unfolding in time, but a multidimensional expression of consciousness exploring itself through the particular lens of your being. The urgent need to plan, to control, to manage your life begins to relax. Not because you become passive or irresponsible, but because you discover that there is an intelligence operating through you that is far more sophisticated than your personal mind, far more compassionate than your personal heart, far more creative than your personal imagination. You begin to trust this intelligence, to collaborate with it, to allow it to live through you. Your relationships transform in ways that are sometimes subtle, sometimes dramatic. People who were drawn to the old you may find themselves uncomfortable with the new you, not because you've become difficult or different in obvious ways, but because you're no longer available for the unconscious dynamics that once defined your interactions. You're no longer willing to play the roles that kept everyone comfortable in their familiar patterns. At the same time, you find yourself drawn to new kinds of connections, not relationships based on mutual need or shared dysfunction, but relationships based on mutual recognition of the divine nature that lives within each person. You begin to see through the personalities, the stories, the dramas that people use to define themselves, and you relate to the essential being that lives beneath all of that. This can be lonely at first. The old you knew how to bond through shared problems, shared complaints, shared struggles. The new you is no longer available for those kinds of connections. You're no longer willing to reinforce the illusion of separation, the story of victimhood, the drama of personal suffering. You're no longer willing to pretend that anyone is broken, that anyone needs healing, that anyone is anything other than perfect consciousness temporarily forgetting its own nature. But this loneliness is not the lonely feeling of isolation. It's the aloneness of completeness. It's the recognition that you are not separate from anything, that you are not lacking anything, that you are not waiting for anything outside yourself to complete you. It's the profound peace that comes from knowing that you are already whole, already perfect, already everything you've been seeking to become. The work you do in the world begins to change as well. Not necessarily your job or your career, though those may shift, but the quality of your engagement with whatever you're doing. You're no longer driven by the need to prove yourself, to achieve success, to gain recognition. You're no longer motivated by fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of not being enough. Instead, you find yourself drawn to activities that feel aligned with something deeper than personal ambition. You find yourself engaged in work that serves not just your own growth, but the growth of consciousness itself. You find yourself called to contribute to the healing of the world, not through fixing what's broken, but through embodying the wholeness that you've recognized as your true nature. This doesn't mean you become a spiritual teacher or a healer in the conventional sense. It means that whatever you do becomes a vehicle for the expression of your authentic nature. Whether you're a parent, a teacher, a business owner, an artist, a janitor, or a CEO, you're doing it from a completely different frequency. You're doing it not as someone trying to get something from the world, but as someone offering something to the world. The paradox is that the less you need from the world, the more the world seems to offer you. The less you seek validation, the more validated you feel. The less you chase success, the more successful you become. The less you try to be loved, the more love you experience. It's as if the universe has been waiting for you to stop grasping so it can give you everything you've been seeking. Jung understood this paradox well. He wrote about the process of individuation as a journey toward wholeness, but he also understood that wholeness is not something you achieve. It's something you recognize. It's something you've always been, temporarily forgetting itself through the dream of separation. Living from this new frequency, you understand that everything in your life, every relationship, every challenge, every success, every failure, has been perfectly orchestrated to bring you to this moment of recognition. You understand that there have been no mistakes, no detours, no wrong turns. Everything has been exactly as it needed to be to prepare you for this emergence into authentic being. The voice that guides you now is not the voice of your personal will, but the voice of universal will expressing itself through your particular form. It's not the voice of your ego trying to get its needs met, but the voice of consciousness itself exploring its own infinite potential through the lens of your unique perspective. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of the self as the archetype of wholeness. It's not a personal self that you develop or improve. It's the impersonal self that you recognize as your true nature. It's not something you become. It's something you remember. It's not something you achieve. It's something you allow. And allowing this self to live through you, to express through you, to love through you, is the most natural thing in the world. It's not an effort or a practice. It's a recognition. It's not something you do. It's something you are. It's not something you become. It's something you've always been, finally ready to stop pretending to be anything else. The cost of rebirth is everything you thought you were. The reward is everything you actually are. Standing here in this new landscape of consciousness, you can finally see the perfect intelligence that has been orchestrating your journey all along. Every wound led you to seek healing. Every healing led you to seek transformation. Every transformation led you to this moment of recognition that you were never broken, never separate, never anything other than the infinite consciousness that you are. The integration of this realization is not a process of adding something new to your life. It's a process of living from the recognition that nothing was ever missing. It's not about becoming whole. It's about recognizing that you've always been whole. It's not about finding yourself. It's about accepting yourself so completely that the very idea of being lost becomes impossible. Jung wrote extensively about the integration of the shadow, but from this new perspective, you understand that the shadow was never something to be integrated. It was something to be recognized as never having been separate from the light. The parts of yourself you rejected, the aspects of your nature you denied, the qualities you projected onto others, they were all movements of the same consciousness, all expressions of the same source, all facets of the same diamond. The shadow integration that happens at this level is not about making peace with your darkness. It's about recognizing that darkness and light are both concepts arising in the same aware space. It's about understanding that the very consciousness that knows your shame also knows your glory, that the same awareness that witnesses your fear also witnesses your love, that the very being that experiences your pain also experiences your joy. This is the ultimate shadow work, not the integration of unconscious contents, but the recognition that consciousness itself is the light in which all shadows appear. Not the acceptance of your dark side, but the understanding that there is no dark side, only different movements of the same light. Not the healing of your wounded parts, but the recognition that wholeness itself is what appears as apparent fragmentation. Living from this recognition, you discover that presence is not something you cultivate. It's something you are. You discover that awareness is not something you develop. It's something you recognize as your very nature. You discover that love is not something you feel. It's something you are made of. The relationships in your life begin to reflect this new understanding. Instead of relating to others as separate beings who might meet your needs or disappoint your expectations, you begin to relate to them as expressions of the same consciousness that you are. You see their struggles as your struggles, their pain as your pain, their joy as your joy, not in a codependent way, but in a recognition of the fundamental unity that underlies all apparent diversity. This doesn't mean you lose your individuality or your personal boundaries. It means you understand that your individuality is not separate from the whole. Your personal boundaries are not walls that keep you separate, but membranes that allow for the flow of consciousness between different expressions of the same source. Your unique perspective is not a limitation, but a gift that consciousness gives to itself. The work you do in the world becomes an expression of this recognition. Whether you're raising children, creating art, running a business, or simply living your daily life, you're doing it from the understanding that you are consciousness itself, exploring its own infinite potential through the particular lens of your being. You're not trying to achieve something for yourself. You're allowing something to express itself through you. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of the self as the archetype of wholeness. It's not a personal self that you develop or improve. It's the impersonal self that you recognize as your true nature. It's not something you become. It's something you remember. It's not something you achieve. It's something you allow. The freedom that comes with this recognition is not the freedom to do whatever you want. It's the freedom from the illusion that you are separate from what you want. It's not the freedom to get what you desire. It's the freedom from the illusion that you are separate from what you desire. It's not the freedom to become who you want to be. It's the freedom from the illusion that you are separate from who you want to be. This freedom is not license. It's responsibility. Not the responsibility of the ego to manage and control, but the responsibility of consciousness to express itself authentically through your particular form. Not the responsibility to get your life right, but the responsibility to allow life to live itself through you. Not the responsibility to achieve your potential, but the responsibility to allow your potential to achieve itself through you. The inner freedom that emerges from this recognition is not something you can lose, because it's not something you gained. It's something you are. It's not something you achieve because it's something you recognize. It's not something you become, because it's something you've always been. This is the ultimate teaching of depth psychology. Not that you need to heal your wounds, but that you need to recognize that you are the healing. Not that you need to integrate your shadow, but that you need to recognize that you are the light in which all shadows appear. Not that you need to become whole, but that you need to recognize that you are wholeness itself, temporarily forgetting its own nature. The cost of this recognition is everything you thought you were. The reward is everything you actually are. The cost is the death of the false self. The reward is the birth of the true self. The cost is the illusion of separation. The reward is the recognition of unity. The cost is the story of your brokenness. The reward is the reality of your wholeness. Standing here, in this new landscape of consciousness, you can finally see the perfect intelligence that has been orchestrating your journey all along. Every experience, every relationship, every challenge, every triumph has been perfectly designed to bring you to this moment of recognition. There have been no mistakes, no detours, no wrong turns. Everything has been exactly as it needed to be to prepare you for this emergence into authentic being. The journey of healing has brought you to the threshold of rebirth. The work of integration has prepared you for the recognition of wholeness. The process of individuation has led you to the discovery that you are not an individual consciousness, but individual consciousness, the one consciousness expressing itself through the unique lens of your being. This is not the end of your journey. It's the beginning of your real life. It's not the completion of your growth. It's the recognition that growth is what you are. It's not the achievement of your potential. It's the understanding that you are potential itself, exploring its own infinite possibilities through the adventure of being human. The silence that once felt like abandonment now feels like homecoming. The emptiness that once felt like loss now feels like fullness. The darkness that once felt like confusion now feels like the womb of infinite possibility. The death that once felt like ending now feels like the beginning of eternal life. You are not a human being having a spiritual experience. You are a spiritual being having a human experience. You are not a broken person seeking healing. You are wholeness itself, temporarily forgetting its own nature. You are not a seeker looking for truth. You are truth itself, exploring its own infinite depths through the adventure of seeking. The rebirth is complete. The integration is ongoing. The recognition is eternal. You are not who you thought you were. You are infinitely more than you ever imagined. You are not separate from what you seek. You are what you seek, seeking itself through the beautiful illusion of your personal journey. If you've crossed this threshold, if you've recognized this truth, if you've allowed this rebirth to happen through you, then you know. You know that silence is not emptiness but fullness.